Thank you all for coming and welcome. I see some of my fellow Nebraskans here tonight, which is great, and a nice collection of other folks. So thank you all for being here. I want to just open things by saying what these three senators did was so courageous and so gutsy and so earth-shaking. In a state like Nebraska, those of you who are not Nebraskans may not be aware of this, but Nebraska is not a liberal state. When I was on the Clinton campaign 30-some years ago in 1992, the first Clinton, we were ahead. Right after the convention, we had this huge surge of support. We were ahead in the nationwide polls by 25 points. We were ahead in every single state in the country except one, Nebraska. In Nebraska, we were down 13 points. There's a 38-point spread between the national poll and Nebraska. It is a very conservative state. What they did was amazing. But we also know that this is not easy stuff. To be talking to folks in Nebraska or Iowa or Michigan or Wisconsin about these issues is not easy. I mean, people are scared about these issues. They're uncertain. They're confused. There's grandmothers who's, it's like they're not sure what to call their grandchild, and that freaks them out, right? This is hard stuff. And so we need a strategy. And we thought we should have a conversation with folks in DC about how we build a strategy, and that these three legislators were the perfect folks to do it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Charlotte, who we're delighted to have with us as well.
And Mike, I just want to give you so much thanks. I feel like there are a lot of parts of the movement who are shying away from this because it's too hard or too complex. Maybe they're intimidated by the issues, and you are not intimidated by it. And I really appreciate how intentionally and thoughtfully you navigated this. It means a lot.
Thanks. Well, a lot of what I do is working class politics, and this is hard for working class folks, but we got to figure out how to do it because we can't walk away from this community. We can't walk away from these issues. So.
Couldn't agree more. Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thanks for coming to see us. Yeah.
It's so great to have you all here, especially to talk about this. I am from the great state of Texas, proudly so, insufferably so. And I'm also from a working class family. And I feel like how we talk to different constituencies really depends on our information, our knowledge, our networks, and you three have done such an incredible job of navigating this space under less than ideal circumstances. And we're here to learn from you, so I'm really excited for this. So let's start with here, all three of you. What was it that motivated you to start the Don't Legislate Hate PAC? Start this in.
Ooh. I was doing this thing where I was talking a lot, and it turns out that it mattered to a lot of people, and not just people in Nebraska. And there was a lot of honestly overwhelming attention, and I thought we need to direct this to something positive, and I am not doing what I'm doing to benefit myself, quite the opposite. My husband is here, he can tell you. I have 3 small kids. It did not benefit us in any way, shape, or form. He was a single parent for several months. So thank you to Nick for being a single parent. But I felt like we needed some direction with this energy and this moment in time, and we would not have been where we were in Nebraska if people had invested in Nebraska in 2022.
That's exactly right.
One vote.
That's exactly
One
right.
vote.
Mhm.
So then I talked to these two.
Yeah, so Machaela Machaela sustained the longest filibuster in the history of the country. She herself spoke for over 400 hours in support and in defense of the right of trans youth to access healthcare, to be themselves, to use their correct pronouns, to see themselves as people who can even have a future in our state. And of course, trans people exist. They have always existed. There will always be trans Nebraskans. There will always be trans Americans. And the question we were talking about wasn't, are we going to have them or not? It was just, are we going to make sure that this is a place where they are safe? And we had a lot of colleagues who were determined to make sure that Nebraska was not going to be a safe and welcoming place for them. And in fact, a violent and harmful place for them. And Machaela, from day 2 of that conversation, after it was clear that there was going to be no traditional political path to compromise or negotiation or getting people off of this bill, she took up the mantle to do this filibuster because she understood the rules, she understood the procedures and the tools that we have in our toolbox, and she took the initiative to start that. I wasn't quite there on day 1 or day 2 because I still had hope in, we have moderate colleagues. We have colleagues that maybe we can still reason with. And
Well, you were telling me before this, it wasn't so long ago that Nebraska was not as extreme.
Well, that's exactly right. And Senator Fredrickson, John here, our good friend, he played a really important role through the whole session in keeping his wits about him and doing those negotiations and talking to the people that I wanted to throw off a cliff, and Machaela too, probably.
We should note that the introducer of the bill sits behind John and I sit next to John. So John was in the hot seat every single day.
But as Senator Cavanaugh said, we started to get a lot of notice from around the country, and we're just in Nebraska minding our fucking business. Like, I'm not trying to be on Rachel Maddow, I'm not trying to, we're really used to being a flyover country, and we're really okay with that. It's like, we're gonna mind our business and do what we need to do and stay in our lane and take care of ourselves, and we're not doing any of this for press attention. We're not doing any of this to have people notice us or anything, but they did. And Machaela thought, and we thought, it would be a waste of this platform, and it would be a waste of the opportunity in the small slice of time that we have to be in the legislature, that we have to use this platform, if we didn't use it in service of making our legislature more moderate, more thoughtful, more attentive to evidence, and more supportive of kids coming up in our state no matter how they identify.
Absolutely. John, do you have anything to add to that?
I think the two of them covered it very well. So this was my freshman year in the legislature. So these two were
thrown in.
And John, can I brag on you for those who don't know? First openly gay man elected to the Nebraska legislature.
So
And most handsome openly gay.
Oh.
Let me put it that way.
So this was a very unique year to start, and just to sort of underscore, Nebraska historically has had an extraordinarily moderate state legislature. So yes, we are a red state, as Mike said earlier, but we're a nonpartisan unicameral. We're the only one in the country, so we're a bit of a unicorn, and that has worked to the state's advantage in that we haven't seen really progressive policy in Nebraska, but we also haven't seen extraordinarily regressive
This was
policy
our first
as well.
anti-trans bill ever.
First anti-trans bill ever. And so, this being introduced in and of itself in Nebraska was unprecedented in so many ways. And Senator Cavanaugh, saw this whole thing way before any of us did. She jumped on the grenade and started filibustering. I'm week 2 into the legislature, I'm thinking, what in the hell is going on? And, and to Megan's point, Megan had hope that we could negotiate as time went on. For better or worse, I was involved in a lot of these conversations with negotiation. And for me, what was really difficult was knowing that we had a number of colleagues who, on final read, voted to pass this bill who didn't believe in this bill.
In their heart, they hated it.
And that,
all the way to the end.
Tell us about those conversations. How those conversations go?
In terms of knowing where colleagues stood?
Right,
or
talking to them behind the scenes.
Yeah, I think it was just, you could write a whole dissertation on sort of this last session, but I think that folks in the legislature who are thoughtful and thinking people sort of understand how our legislature works. And 574, which is the bill number that passed, you know, we've talked about this a lot. This is a bill that is not designed to be good policy. This is a bill that is
It's not even really written to do what it wants to do. It's like badly written.
It's
like
poorly
I
written.
could write a more hateful bill that would actually work. She can't even write it.
But and there are folks who voted for the bill who knew that, right? And we saw that as evidenced by on October 1st when this bill went into law. I mean, it was a scramble last minute to release emergency regulations on how to actually implement the bill. Well thought out and meaningful policy is ready to go from the day it's implemented. Now, there's always going to be, you know, tweaks, things that need to be fixed, but this was as though it was the first time they were thinking of how are we actually going to enforce this bill.
It's like they caught the car.
It's
you
like
know?
they caught the car.
Oh, now you have to.
And so, and a number of our colleagues who supported the bill, they know that. They know that. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges is that, you know, we're seeing not for the first time, but we're certainly seeing on a more extreme level in Nebraska, more and more of a partisan lockstep operating rules, which is not, we all know, that's not how good governance works, so.
And it should be said that in Nebraska, we've never had that before.
Yep.
Like, I feel like I talk to people in other states and they're like, yeah, it's partisan. Republicans are this way, Democrats are this way, and never the two should meet. But in Nebraska, this is the first time we've ever been faced with this kind of culture. So it's weird.
When you're talking to anti-LGBTQ lawmakers or even folks on the fence within the legislature, or even constituents for that matter, what do those conversations look like? Are there common myths that come up, propaganda that you have to push back against? Like, what are some success stories and kind of get folks to see
They
this?
don't want to be anti-LGBTQ.
Yeah?
They don't believe that they are, and they hated us calling them out on it. It embarrassed them, it shamed them. They would come up to us, they would try to talk to Megan, and they would try to talk to me. I had numerous senators come to me off the mic and tell me about so-and-so who they knew who was gay or trans,
Or
et cetera.
trans, yes.
And I was like, well, they must be really disappointed in you.
They watch Drag Race?
Yeah.
Yeah, they watch Drag Race.
Yes. And they did not want to believe that they were on the wrong side of history.
They were part of the problem. Yeah, I had colleagues come up to me on the floor and be like, you know this isn't personal. Like, I'm not talking about you, because I know you're a good parent. I'm talking about the bad parents. And so, like, don't take it personally because it's not, I know you're not that way. And I'm just like, it doesn't make a fucking difference at the end of the day how good a parent is, who a kid. Tell that to the kid who now can't get their prescription filled. Tell that to the kid who now has had, you know, hatred against their identity normalized in the highest echelons of state government. How do you think that makes them feel? If you take that vote, no one's going to go through the history books and say, oh, but don't worry because Senator John Smith said sorry to Megan. So, like, he didn't mean to hurt anybody's feelings. Like, no, all they're going to see is that they voted for the bill, it passed, and now people are suffering.
Was this due more to fear of political retribution, or because they tacitly bought the propaganda they were hearing
They
about trans?
felt bad.
Yeah.
I think they just, you mean like why they voted for it?
Why they voted for
Oh,
it, yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
can I jump in
Yeah,
there?
please.
Okay, so if this had been introduced in 2022, it would not have passed in Nebraska. We have term limits, and the moderate Republicans were turned out, and some yahoos were, and they know who they are if they're watching at home, were voted in, and the people who were our centrists did not have the courage to
Picking a nice
stand up and say, this is ridiculous. We are going to create our own little group and stand together and not vote for cloture on this bill. They could have ended it immediately, and they chose not to because they wanted something else in the future, perhaps. They wanted to get something else. So they voted to take away parental rights. They committed a human rights violation in the state of Nebraska.
And threw in an abortion ban for good
And threw an
measure.
abortion ban for good
Let's not
measure.
forget that part.
And they did all of this because there was something somewhere that they wanted, and they didn't want retribution from the other Republicans. And that is the epitome of weakness, and that is the epitome of a lack of leadership, and people like that should not be in public policy.
Absolutely.
And when people say to me, like, what you did was so brave, no, it wasn't. It's my job. It's my job. And if your representatives aren't doing their job, get different representatives. Just show up. Don't give up. Show up. Sorry.
No, no. Can't agree more.
I feel very strongly about this. 400 hours strong, apparently.
It really frustrated me, kind of what you're saying about, like, we had this group of strong moderates kind of move out. We had new baby moderates come in, and they weren't strong enough to stand up against the radical right. That was all not powerful, new, freshman senators, not experienced. A leader 2 years ago would have slapped them down so fast and said, you know, why don't you pass a few bills before you try to start a social culture war fight like this? Like, you look insane. And no one had the courage to do that, as you said, because I think they thought that they were going to negotiate later for something that they wanted or whatever. Like, they're doing politics. They're being politicians. Like, they look at a movie or they look at TV and they think, this is how politicians act, so I'm going to play act like I am one. But issue by issue, like, there's always a way to get something passed. And yeah, I agree with what she
Can I
said.
interject
Yes.
with a
Yeah.
question?
Yes.
What was the role of the governor on this? Because I know the governor's trying to establish his right-wing bona fides and prove himself to all the right-wing nut jobs. Was he really twisting arms on this and pushing hard on it?
I'd say there's probably an invisible hand.
Pete Ricketts?
No,
What?
the governor had an invisible hand.
It was visible as hell.
Well,
No, he was, you speak on it,
What
yeah.
I'll say to that is, it's interesting because, you know, to be frank, I don't 100% know what the role of the governor was during the actual legislative session. I mean, I knew he was advocating for this bill, but in terms of what that looked like, I personally don't know. Since this bill has been passed, the governor has signed an executive order. It's called the Women's Bill of Rights.
And you may have seen this around the country because it's a copy of it.
And so this is something that the governor, I think, has made clear since the session that this seems to be a priority of his, just like it seems to be a priority of the introducer of the bills, which again, I think one of the most important things we need to do around this type of policy and these types of bill is to continue to keep one of our feet sort of solidly grounded in reality, which is that this is not a priority of the average Nebraskan. This is not a priority of the average American. Even folks who tend to be conservative, who maybe tend to vote Republican, this is not their number one issue. It simply is not. Polling shows this, certainly polling in the state of Nebraska, recent
Elections
polling show this. And this narrative is being pushed as though the trans community, and specifically trans youth, are the biggest threat to our state, to our democracy, to our future. And that is just not, it's just not based in reality. And so being able to call that out for what it is, I think is an important strategic form, is to not get sort of sucked into this sort of dialogue all the time and more of a just like, wait a minute, like, okay, I understand that this is all you want to talk about and what you think is, you know, the number one priority of the state, but the majority of Nebraskans, frankly, are worried about childcare and affordable housing and, I mean, like most Americans, right? These are the things that are actually affecting people's lives. You know, a trans kid wanting to play volleyball is not what people are going to the ballot box for.
I'm going to say something ungenerous, but I think that the reason a lot of politicians, whether they're in Nebraska or in Texas or in Congress or wherever they are at a school board, the reason they go after these easy culture war issues, whether it's abortion or trans stuff or youth stuff or book burning or whatever it is that's the thing du jour, is because they can't do anything else. They can't do real policy.
No
And
ideas.
this is me saying this. Like, if you, and I'm going to put you in it too, if you gave me and John the budget book for the next biennium and said, okay, you two are in charge of figuring out the budget for health and human services and foster care and provider rates, Nebraska would be screwed. Because like, we don't really know how to do that. And we have other strengths. I don't mean to put ourselves down, but like, We are not electing people who have experience or expertise in actual policy. We're electing people who are spicy on social media, me included. We're electing people who are good in front of a camera, who get a lot of attention, so voters recognize their name and they see it on the ballot and they go, oh, they hate trans people, they love trans people, I agree with them. And then that's how we're actually getting people elected, instead of like, they know about provider rates, they know about building codes, like, and so that's literally the work that we're trying to do with this PAC, is let's just elect normal people who come from normal backgrounds, who can come into our legislative bodies and make normal decisions, so that every debate that we have over the next 8 years isn't about identity, culture war, this and that, whatever people saw on Fox News. It's actually about the kitchen table issues that are facing Nebraskans.
I couldn't agree more. I totally agree. I do feel like there are a lot of Americans who are vulnerable to disinformation right now. And in good faith, they will read something horrifically anti-trans, and it just completely shapes their view. How do you talk to constituents who approach you with good faith questions about trans issues because they're honestly just confused and they have nowhere to start?
It depends on what the question is. If it's sharing a conspiracy theory,
Gender affirming care, let's put it that way.
they ask about it.
Yeah, they ask, why would you let kids get gender affirming care?
Well, can I actually take this
Yes,
one? 'Cause
please.
This is something that I'm really interested in, because so my professional background is, my educational background is in social work. I'm a licensed mental health provider. Before I was in the legislature, I was providing mental health treatment for over a decade, including a lot of work with the LGBTQ community. And so, for me, it was very fascinating to listen to debate about what gender affirming care is on the mic, and the amount of misinformation out there that is just so foreign from the reality of what actually happens in the clinical setting and in a provider setting. And so one thing, and this was a lesson learned for me this year in the legislature, I tried in very good faith to sort of underscore and outline, the process that a patient might go through in order to achieve care and to obtain care. And, it was as though
Not just on the mic, face-to-face.
Face-to-face conversations.
Painstakingly doing this
Yes.
man.
And then I would have colleagues on the mic, like, minutes later come up and just completely say, like, pull out of a hat, like, something that was completely just not based in, who has no, they read a tweet about this, or, who knows what they read. But, and to say nothing about the fact that, the Nebraska Medical Association, all of the major providers were out here advocating against this bill. And
To say nothing about 30 major medical associations oppose these bans.
And
But
so,
our local groups were there in the rotunda lobbying.
and so, source matters, right? So, and that's something that I think we struggle with, to your point, Charlotte, in this country, is we struggle with, I think, with being discerning on where we're getting our information and the weight we're putting on information. So, if the Nebraska Medical Association says something, we're providing the same weight to that as we are of, Linda from
The church
Iowa,
bulletin,
who,
which literally happened.
that did happen on the mic.
Holding it up. Well, it says in here. Are you
but-
serious?
And so there's something to be said about, and that's a difficult conversation to have, is because you don't want to sound pejorative, but you also kind of want to say, like, look, like, what do you mean, like, yes, like your church bulletin says
Do we
this,
have
that's
literacy?
different than, the medical association, so.
Yeah.
Well, how about this? Because it's clear that there are lawmakers, your colleagues, who are just steadfastly, intentionally ignorant on this. Ignorant, right? Like publicly ignorant. They play stupid and then go behind the scenes and apologize to you later, right? If I am a voter or a resident of Nebraska, and I'm thinking about running against someone on the far right for a seat in the legislature, what would be your recommendation to that person on how to run against an anti-LGBTQ platform when these issues do come up?
Talk about the things that people care about.
Yeah.
Like, stop. This issue is important because it's people's lives, and so it's important, and it is important to fight for it. But if you are running for office and you are at somebody's door, they are not going to tell you. If you say, are you worried about being able to pay your property taxes, or are you worried about somebody in your community having a transgender child? They're gonna be like, well, my property taxes are more important to me because this is my house and I want to live here. And but we have allowed the conversation. These are not things that should be legislated. Healthcare should not be legislated. And in Nebraska, healthcare is not legislated this way except for abortion and now trans healthcare. I'm on the Health and Human Services Committee. We have a credentialing review process. It goes through the Board of Health. It takes years. And then after the Board of Health makes a recommendation to change the scope of practice, a bill is introduced. And then it takes years to educate the committee, to get them to vote it out, to get it on the floor, to get it to go through 3 rounds of debate and pass into law. That
And
is
this
how
is
we
for like optometry.
Right.
Like, yeah.
This is like scraping scales off of eyes. I tell you that because I've had to hear it for 5 years and it's really disgusting. But it is
But thank
thorough
God we have the
and
process
diligent.
to make sure
Yes.
it's done safely
Yes.
and according to best practices.
So we should not legislate. We should not legislate healthcare without it going through the proper vetting process of actual medical professionals deciding what healthcare should look like. And that is not what happened here. And we should be making sure that kids have school meals, making sure that people have a place to live, making sure that education is funding,
Paid family leave.
paid family medical leave. Yes, the whole
Would you like to brag a little bit?
that's the whole reason I ran for office was paid family medical leave. Yeah, well, I ran when I did because the governor at the time cut funding for developmental disabilities. He did a line item veto, and my opponent didn't vote to override the veto. So I was like, well, hell's no, I'm gonna run against you, lady. But I'm kind of spicy too.
So one of the big, I would say, gosh, in vogue talking points within the far right, or really the larger conservative movement right now, is the question of parents' rights, right? And yet,
Sometimes.
oh, right, sometimes. Speak more about that, because the hypocrisy here is pretty stunning.
Which
that
rights?
Parents'
Yeah.
rights only apply sometimes, not all the time, right? Megan, would you like to start with that?
Yeah, sure. I don't know if I have a really intelligent thing to say about it, but I
don't believe
it is really hypocritical to see when we're talking about parents' rights on the right. Some of the things they want to have the right over is whether their kid will get vaccinated, and if they don't do that, of course, they put all the other children at risk, and that's not the unvaccinated child's fault. You know, that's a decision a parent makes, not only to protect their child, but to protect the rest of society at large. And so that kind of parents' rights decision has ripple effects that can make other people very sick. Or whether or not we're going to have a certain book in school. They see that a parent's right is the right to not have to go to a school where there's a controversial book in the library. And so then the book gets removed. And again, this has negative effects on every other child and every other parent who's then had their right taken away. You know, if they wanted their children to have the right to read a book. I feel like on the radical right, and today's conservative movement, as Charlotte put it, all of the parents' rights come around the right to harm others. It's not the right to keep your child safe. It's not the right to run your home as you see fit. We already have the right to do that. You have the right to decide how you're going to worship in your family. You have the right to decide how you're going to educate your child. We have extremely, a lot of latitude in Nebraska about how we're going to educate our kids. You can homeschool them easily. We've got like easy ways to send them to private school, a Christian school, everything. But the rights they want translate down the line into the right to harm other children, the right to harm other families, and the right to take other rights away from others. And that's what, to me, the difference is so much between me saying, you know, I know my child best. Everyone who knows me as a parent, which is all 49 of my colleagues, can see that I'm a fantastic parent. They've had me over for dinner. They've had me over to tour their farms. We've gone on trips together. And they still looked me in the face and voted to take my rights away as a parent, and more importantly, to take my child's rights away. And that just harms people.
I will also just kind of piggyback on that. one of the big aha moments I had during session was when I really kind of noticed that the biggest supporters of this bill, of the ban, they were alleging that they were there to protect other people's kids. Right? The biggest opponents of the bill, the folks who were speaking out against it, were there to protect their own kids. And that told me everything I needed to know. You know, the experts on the issue, the people most directly affected by the bill, were against it, right? The people who knew nothing about the community, knew nothing about the issues, were the staunchest advocates for it. And that tells you everything right there. And it sort of really underscores what Megan was saying, is that it's not about the individual parents' rights, it's about their right to sort of get into decisions that are really between a family and their doctors.
But this is the whole theme of the conservative movement right now. It's not only like parents' rights to like harm everybody else, but the right over your health care, whether that's abortion or any other kind of bodily autonomy that we're talking about, it's all related to the same problem, which is just the authority to control others. Sound like a libertarian, you know.
There's this
Big government is what it is.
this common accusation of Democrats being for mutilating kids, right? I mean, that's the thing that you see all the time online. Lawmakers say it a lot. Patently untrue. Can we talk about why it isn't true? Really quickly, just to dispel the myths for the folks in the audience. Megan, would you like to start? Given
Why don't you
Well,
go
I mean,
ahead?
there's, I mean, look, that's very sensationalized language.
Right.
I think it's sort of, it's mimicked after, you know.
and I'm being intentional about that because this is what
Of
we hear.
course.
You know that's what they
It
say.
is what they say, and it's sort of, it's the same area that we see from a lot of anti-abortion folks around, you know, this very graphic, and the intention of that, again, just like the policy, it's meant to strike emotions,
To
to
shock.
rile up a base, to shock, to sort of like foam at the mouth, get people really, you know, if you hear that phrase, of course, that's like a terrible thing to hear. The reality of gender affirming care is that it is extraordinarily thoughtful in how it's delivered. The majority of care that's provided before 18, or in the state of Nebraska, the age of majority is 19, so we're a little bit older. But the vast majority of this is going to involve counseling services, puberty blockers, hormone. I mean, there's nothing to be said. I mean, this idea of genital mutilation, again, it's sensationalized. It's not based in reality of how thoughtful, best practice, evidence-based treatment is provided.
That's not how gender affirming care even works.
It's just not how it works.
And you know, our colleagues, to hear them talk about it, they obviously think, like many ignorant Americans, that this is how it works. Your normal, happy child sees a TikTok about a trans person, then they decide they want to cut their penis off. And you have to let them do it because that's woke, and we're all woke now, so that's the end.
So
And
you go to the
it's
vending machine at the
ridiculous.
mall. to get-
Exactly,
yeah.
yeah. No parental consent. I mean, we're laughing, but like, it's funny,
It's
and it is
fear-mongering.
funny,
It's
but
fear-mongering.
it's frustrating when you're on the floor of a legislative deliberative body and you're hearing people literally talk about this, and you're giving them all of this evidence to the contrary, and they don't accept it. They don't believe it.
And in reality, it's no surgery before 18, no hormones
Right.
before 16, and then puberty blockers. More non-trans kids are using puberty blockers annually than trans kids.
Yes.
Yes.
And have been for decades.
Yes. And this confuses the standard of care for all kinds of
But you go on the Daily
diagnoses.
Wire, and it's like
Yes.
this kid was. It is a complete bastardization of the
And
issue.
also,
Just-
practitioners are very responsible.
and it's rigorous, right?
I mean, with my child, we'd been in therapy for a year before we started talking about puberty blockers, and it's like, that's pretty normal, actually. Like, and it's not like it's easy and cheap to go to therapy either. It's just, it's not like it is when they sensationalize and make it sound really accessible.
So I, we'll go ahead.
Oh,
Regina.
just quickly, in Nebraska, top surgery for both boys and girls who are not trans is significantly higher than for trans teens. So just,
We got
Well,
gynecomastia,
yeah.
we got breast implants. People are doing any old thing. to
and it is
themselves, and-
fine if your 17-year-old daughter wants to have double Ds.
Yes.
But
Yes.
not if your 17-year-old biologically born son does.
In
So-
2020, 3,000 young women who are not transgender got elective breast surgery. Under 18, and it wasn't illegal.
A lot of our colleagues might have seen some, well, I was
not
about
legal in
to.
Nebraska.
Ooh. All right, I think we're gonna get to some
So,
Q&A.
yeah, I'd
Relaxing.
love to get, engage folks in the audience, and we do have, by the way, a congressional candidate from rural Georgia here. You want to stand up and?
Hey, you're so
Thank you for saving democracy
and
for
it's
Shane.
great. It's great that you're here
Glad to
today.
be here.
Bob, you want
I
to?
got a quick question. First off, as the proud grandfather of a transgender young man who is a wonderful teacher, thank you all very much for your standing up for things. I have two quick questions. One is, in the polling, when it comes to freedom of reproductive choice, the imagery of a politician in the examining room with the doctor is a killer,
It's
right?
very good,
We should-
yeah.
Does that work here too, number one? Number two, how many hours of filibuster did you say you did?
She herself, yeah.
Well, to the first question, I don't think it works in transgender healthcare because this is such a new political issue that people do not understand it. And I am on the Health and Human Services Committee, and I will openly admit, if you asked me on January 1 of this year what gender affirming care was, I would have been like, I have no idea. I had to educate myself because, as I do on a lot of bills that come like eyeballs to my committee, and I had to listen to the testimony. And so we are not at the point where people even understand what gender affirming care is. So the idea, I think, to focus on more is around, with youth at least, is parental rights. And also discrimination. Like I said, a teenage girl can have breast surgery, a teenage boy can have breast surgery, but not if he identifies as a girl. And to talk about the discriminatory part of that, I think is really important. I am the middle of 8 children, and I apparently just know how to talk a lot.
So I just want to tell one quick story about Machaela. I was back in Nebraska.
I'm gonna have to go for 1 second. We need to give a round of applause to John. He's gonna have to step out.
I have to step
Oh,
out. I'm so
we're
sorry.
gonna-
Thank you all for being here. Thank you for coming.
Mike, will you join the ladies on the couch?
Yeah,
Sure.
Please.
John at Bishop, BC.
So I was back in Nebraska in the middle of the months-long filibuster, and I always go up to the state capitol when I'm home and see old friends. But I had never met Machaela. The Cavanaugh family is like a legendary political family in Nebraska. Her uncle was one of my dearest friends. He's passed away. So many great Cavanaughs, and I was like, I've never met this Cavanaugh.
And look at her go.
And she was on the floor of the legislature, and she was talking and talking and talking, and finally, maybe she turned to you so she could take a break, and she came out to say hello, and she's like, I got to get back. I'm filibustering. So that was our very brief meeting the first time.
What was I talking about?
I don't remember.
Salad. I talked about salad.
It was not this issue. It was,
And the Oxford comma. That was one of my go-tos.
There you go.
Probably
Are you pro or
Are you pro?
What was it?
I had a very robust debate with myself over multiple days.
I'm pro Oxford comma.
I tried to have a fair and balanced debate, but I do support the Oxford comma.
Oh,
Yes!
You almost lost my vote there for a second.
It is not essential, but it is clarifying, and we could all do with more clarification.
Here we go.
Yes.
Amen.
That's right.
Yes,
Okay.
I think this might have been the longest filibuster in American history.
it is,
It
yes.
is.
The other one was 48 hours.
Is that right?
400 hours, 60 days.
Yep.
That's 16 days.
60.
60.
60.
6-0.
I want to respond to this question that you asked too. I agree with what Senator Cavanaugh said about there's still a lot of ignorance about gender affirming care. And that's also kind of a phrase that, 20 years from now we might not call it that. Things might change in our culture, And what I think the focus on is that there are politicians that are obsessed with kids' genitals.
Yes.
How are you going to know if the kid is going to the right bathroom? Really, Senator Cal? How are you going to enforce that? Are you going to be at the door on crotch watch?
Yeah.
Who's going to do that? You? Really explain to people, like, okay, when you think about bathroom bills and stuff like this, you picture a big, strong, burly man coming into the women's bathroom and intimidating you. That's what you're afraid of. In practice, do you know that you've been in bathrooms with trans people probably 100 times? At airports, at stadiums, at schools, at universities, at parties, and you had no frickin' idea? Because there's no danger. And it's the same with kids who just want to play with their friends. So we have these politicians who are obsessed with kids' genitals, and then we're here trying to elect people who care about workforce development in Nebraska, making sure that our public schools are frickin' staffed so that your kid has a teacher and we're not defunding them. Provider rates to make sure that you can get cancer treatment when you need it. Property tax, so you can stay in your house. Like, are you serious? And I think just making sure that voters understand how silly that sounds when you really kind of put that into perspective. And that's what has worked for me talking to voters.
I do, someone reached out to me promoting the event. It's like, we have to stop talking about this because this is exactly what the right wing wants. They are baiting us into having this conversation, and this is exactly the conversation that Steve Bannon wants to have. That the right wing will win, and I'm like, actually, it's not, because if we're not talking about it, every single time that we don't tackle the issue straight on, head on, and diffuse it, they are masters at just manipulating that void. And so to have people like you in fighting that battle in red states and engaging in that conversation and saying, you know what, we could have a conversation about denying my constitutional rights, or we could have a conversation about how to maybe get healthcare costs lower. Which one would you rather have? And I think that having that pivot to economic issues is so important. I just wonder how you strike that balance when you're talking to constituents. Are you gearing it from progressives and conservatives? Is it across the political spectrum, or do you have different?
Well, we were both just reelected. Yeah.
Well, I want to say one thing that might surprise you, or maybe not, but I actually don't have constituents or normal people or folks in line at the coffee shop, or I own a store in my district coming into my store. Nobody talks to me about this. Literally nobody is like, now look, I got a question about gender affirming care. So is what you're talking about this and that? And nobody says this actually. And I don't actually get a lot of questions from constituents. I get trolls, 80% of whom don't live in Nebraska. I get people who have already made up their mind to hate me and who have hated me for 8+ years that I've been in politics. I don't get a lot of good faith questions about this because I don't think that the average Nebraskan is actually that confused about it. I think they're more worried about other things. And to me, that's encouraging. Because if you were to listen to talk radio or watch Fox News or any of this, it would make you think this is the first thing on everybody's mind. But as a person who is out in the community, people just aren't actually talking about it. It's only in these echo chambers of political spaces.
Yeah, I've never had anybody in person approach me outside of the rotunda in support of banning gender affirming care. Never. And I have had people approach me when they see me out places that have thanked me after session. I couldn't go to Trader Joe's.
I had a lot of people approach me and say, you know what, trans stuff, I don't get it, but thank you for standing up for people.
I have had that.
Or I don't know about trans people, but we got to move on to other stuff. And that's more often what you hear than anything hateful.
Can I emphasize for a second how important it is what you two do and what John does in force? Last year during the midterms, there was this candidate, city member of Congress, who was running against a far-right conservative opponent, and their opponent was saying, I don't know, whatever transphobia bullshit or whatever. This city member of Congress asked their staff to reach out to the DCCC to ask me to speak out against their opponent. Like several different gates here. And I think that Lauren is absolutely right. When we leave a void, the far right is all too happy to fill that with all kinds of insane propaganda.
Yeah.
But by the way, I don't want to be talking about this either. I do think we should be talking about kitchen table issues, universal health care, a living minimum wage, things that actually affect all of us.
If they're talking about it, I'm going to talk about it.
Damn straight.
But
Because if you don't, they're going to weaponize it and hurt the most vulnerable people in society and all of us
They
at the
get
same
to run
time.
the
Well, and
message.
they're also going to say, oh, they're afraid to talk about it. See, we raise these legitimate issues, and they're afraid to talk
They're too
about it.
afraid to debate.
Yeah. Yeah, you all prove that you're not afraid to talk about it. So. Are there other questions from the audience or comments from the audience?
Yeah, well, one, I mean, thank you so much for being here, and really, like, the actions that you all took to stop this bill, I would say inspired us across the country, right? I mean, we've been seeing anti-trans bill after anti-trans bill ramping up for a few years, but this last legislative session was wild, and the way you stood up to that really gave so much hope, I would say, to so many of us. And so I guess, my question is, and I was really fascinated, Machaela, by you saying, I didn't know a ton about this issue before. I had to read about it. Like, that's what I do as a legislator. I educate myself. So I guess I'm wondering, like, what are the ways you think we can get other people to stand up and fight these attacks, right? How do we get regular folks who don't know much about this issue, who haven't really heard about gender affirming care, don't really know trans kids, and not just get them to understand it, but get them to speak for 400 hours to stop the attacks, right? To really take a stand. So how do you see, how do you inspire other lawmakers? How do you inspire people in your community? How do we get more folks to do what you did?
I don't know that you can inspire lawmakers to do anything. I think you can inspire people to get engaged and elect lawmakers that believe in something and stand for something and are willing to do hard things for the right reasons. And if you are not an elected official who is there to improve people's lives, then you should not be an elected official. And it is incumbent upon all of us to work to get people like this fine gentleman. I didn't actually even hear what your name is. Say it again.
Sean Harris.
Sean Harris. Get fine people like Sean Harris in Georgia elected that are gonna stand up. And it really is, apathy is not acceptable. And it is hard. We are all living in this torturous moment, and it is hard. And it was hard for me to get up every single day, but I didn't think of 60 days. I didn't have any goal. I woke up every morning and I was like, I'm gonna do this again today.
You gotta just do the next right thing.
You just have to do the next right thing. And it's never too late to start, but everybody has to be in this fight. And everybody has to hold people accountable. And if you have an elected official who isn't standing up for vulnerable populations, get rid of that person. Just get rid of them. Volunteer, write postcards, donate, make calls, do whatever is within your capacity to do. I did what was in my capacity to do. What I did should not be extraordinary. It should be the ordinary. Standing up for vulnerable populations and using your platform, whatever your platform is, to do that. Do that.
I think that sometimes we reward leadership, or we reward a lack of leadership by telling that person they're a leader. And if we're invested in keeping the status quo the way it is, one way to do that is to elevate and amplify people who aren't doing shit. And that's what we have in a lot of our leadership, not just in elective politics, but in our institutions, in our communities. And I also think everyone's capacity is very different, especially now. I mean, like, so if you're watching online, you're watching this later, you may not know there's a TV over here that I can see. And it's just running news. And it's just like, I'm watching it from time to time going, oh no! And that's what life is like every day for many, many years now, actually. And we all have a lot of fatigue. And one other thing that I've thought about often after this past session of like really putting my whole heart out in public, being very vulnerable, making such a sacrifice for this session, and doing this filibuster with Senator Cavanaugh. I've never done a filibuster to stop building a new prison. I've never filibustered for 400 hours for climate change. I've never filibustered 400 hours for gun safety measures. But there is someone in Nebraska who would have done that. And there is someone in all of our communities who cares as much as I care about the health and safety of my child and other children in Nebraska. And also, this is not to say that I don't care about gun safety, or that my colleagues who joined us in our work don't care about trans kids.
You seem like a big NRA person, though.
I did say I was a libertarian. But I'm saying, like, we all don't have to care the same amount about the same thing. It doesn't mean we don't care, and we shouldn't beat ourselves up about that. Like, I wish that I had a colleague that was filibustering 400 hours for gun safety so I could follow them, so I could take orders from them, so they could lead me, and I could take their example and do something else with it, or help them reach their goal. And I'm so grateful to all of our colleagues who helped us reach our goal, and my neighbors and family and friends who helped us by taking care of our kids and bringing us food and, you know, walking my dog and just making sure that we were okay while we were doing this work. And that's the same, I mean, like, we can't do it without that. So look in your community and see what's the version of that around you. Like, if you're not doing the, you know, metaphorical filibustering 400 hours for the thing that you care about, who is, and how do you get behind them and support their leadership so that we don't just keep having leaders enforcing the status quo. Because leadership is also very subversive. Somebody said to me, gosh, what was his name? Marty? His name was Marty, so sounds smart, right? He is smart.
Scorsese?
Was not that guy, but he said, leadership is disappointing people at a rate that they can absorb, at a rate that they can accept. And I think about that a lot when we're doing edgy, difficult, spicy things. And, you know, leadership is subversive, and that's why it's not often rewarded in our society.
This PAC is making such a big statement to the folks in Nebraska. You wouldn't necessarily have to do the PAC at all. You could just do fundraisers for your campaign, organize queer gatherings, hit up the queer community.
Were.
Sure,
Yeah,
absolutely.
we thought this is now a platform we have because of the experience of this session.
But having the PAC is such a statement. This is important enough. We're going to stick our flag in the ground and campaign on this specifically.
Yeah.
And that's big. I mean, you're inspiring other folks in Nebraska to stand up for this. Probably other folks to run in the future.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Thank God.
Absolutely.
One vote.
One vote.
We needed one.
Can I just say a quick word on one of Mike's partners about parental stuff? Seems to me the way we win is to have more people like you guys who will listen to their mothers and stand up straight, just like you have. So proud. Thank you.
Thank you.
And by the way, what's
He
up?
noted that he wrote a book called Stand Up Straight.
Yeah,
All about
he's-
progressive organizing.
He's quoting himself.
Yeah.
But playing off what Charlotte said, all of you, if you're here, you've probably already given to the PAC. We hope you will give again. We hope you will spread the word.
Please spread the
We
word.
hope
We don't
you
know
will
anybody.
send
Help
this
us.
around on your email lists and your listservs and social media. We need to raise money for this. There's so many key state legislative races, and there in Nebraska politics, the former governor, current senator Pete Ricketts is a billionaire, and he throws his money around like crazy, and has elected a lot of these right wingers, and we need to organize all of us to push back. So we hope people can really throw some money in.
A good thing that I want people who don't live in Nebraska or come from Nebraska to understand is that we have the smallest legislature in the country with only 49 members. We have the only one House legislature in the country. We have the only nonpartisan legislature, so we don't have any majority-minority leaders, we don't have any caucuses. And I think that Nebraska is probably the cheapest state to change everything. You are going to get the best bang for your buck if you invest in Nebraska, because if we can save one legislative seat, if we can save one vote, it's $500,000. Like,
Transformative.
it's transformative. And obviously we need more than that to make sure that we have strong races going in all of our different districts, but you're not going to get bang for your buck like this except in Nebraska because of our unique system.
And there's a long tradition of nonpartisan and bipartisan alliances in the Nebraska legislature because it is nonpartisan. One of the most liberal Democrats who was there for 20 years, a guy by the name of Don Wesley, who's a dear friend of mine. Don was like one of the most left people in the Nebraska legislature, but he kept getting elected chair of the health committee for like 10, 12 years in a row because he was able to bring along Republicans to vote for him. It really is a remarkable legislature.
And that's
in
still
that way.
typical. We
Yeah. And it's
still do
still-
elect
yeah.
a lot of Democrats to leadership roles. My biggest mentor in the legislature is a guy who was term limited in my first year named Paul Shoemaker. And his nephew's actually here, Tom, who now works in DC. And he reminded me to invite you actually. But Paul is a pretty conservative guy. He's a Republican, a conservative guy from rural Nebraska. And I'm a leftist for sure. And he's been one of my most important role models and mentors. So we really do have this very healthy, nonpartisan culture in Nebraska, and it's important to me and Machaela that we save it.
And when I was elected, I ran against a Republican incumbent in a Republican seat
That's
that
right.
the governor also lived in.
Yeah.
I was his senator.
She won
Now
by a
Megan's his
landslide.
senator after redistricting. But
The
I,
governor said, and I quote, "Well, I didn't vote for her." I said, "Oh, I didn't vote for you either."
but I think it does speak to the uniqueness of Nebraska and the unicameral. And I won. Megan and I both won re-election last November, and in spite of redistricting and the Republican majority creating an unfavorable district for me, but
They
clearly
screwed you, but look.
I won by 11%. so I guess I'm doing okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's so, and people, I think, especially my colleagues, I like to tell them that I represent a Republican seat because they really think that I'm one thing, and I'm like, I'm not what you think I am. I'm much more than that, and we all are much more than that. And it's just really important to get back, at least in Nebraska, to a more moderate way of doing things. And seeing who was elected speaker today, it doesn't seem like on a national level we're going to get back to that moderate, collaborative way of doing things. But I would like Nebraska too. So thank you for coming out and supporting us and helping us make more steps towards that.
Well, listen, I know I'm biased, but I'm definitely going to make an additional contribution tonight to the Don't Legislate Hate PAC, and I would encourage you all also to make an additional contribution tonight. Please do so. Let's get not only them reelected, but get more colleagues of theirs into the unicameral and make some change in Nebraska.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Charlotte.
Charlotte.
Thank you all for coming. This has been a great session, a great dialogue. I've learned so much. I was following this very closely because of being a Nebraskan, but I learned a lot tonight, and it was good to hear you all. Charlotte, you did such a great job.
We have more beer. We also have food over here that people should eat.
We have plenty of food, plenty of beer, and I insisted that we have beer and not just wine because this is a Nebraska event. And by the way, Sean is running against Marjorie Taylor Greene, and I wanted to mention in case anybody also wanted to throw some change inch his way.
Sean Harris, Georgia.
Team Georgia.
Thank you all.
You should get a picture.
Love you guys. Thank you.